I bought my family's affection for exactly $360,000. And my final receipt was an empty chair at my own wedding. For a decade, I wasn't a daughter, I was an ATM with a heartbeat, funding my sister's designer life and my parents' delusions of grandeur while I survived on cheap ramen in the dark. But it took just one 52-second phone call while I was standing in my white silk wedding dress for the lifelong illusion to shatter. My mother casually announced they were skipping my wedding for my sister's fabricated networking party. They expected me to swallow the rejection, cry quietly, and keep the monthly deposits flowing. Instead, I permanently closed the bank and prepared a devastatingly public execution of their perfect image. If you've ever had to sever ties with the people who were supposed to protect you, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. To understand how I weaponized 10 years of bank statements to destroy my family's golden facade, you have to see exactly how their trap was built. I grew up in the sweltering suburbs of Austin, Texas. Our house had 3 bedrooms. My sister Jessica got the one with the wide window facing the bright blooming garden. I got the cramped box right next to the garage. Every night the old water heater banged and groaned through the thin wall, sounding like a trapped animal trying to escape. I learned to sleep through the heavy thudding, just like I learned to survive the silence in the rest of the house. My mother had a very specific, carefully rehearsed script. She used it whenever neighbors or friends stopped by the house. She would step forward, her eyes bright and eager. "This is Jessica, my daughter," she would announce. Her hand would lock onto Jessica's shoulder, her fingers pressing in with obvious pride. Her smile would reach her eyes, warm and completely genuine. Then her eyes would slide over to me. The warmth would instantly drain away, leaving a polite, empty stare. A micro-expression of inconvenience crossed her face before she forced a thin smile. "And this is Sarah, Jessica's older sister. Not her daughter, Jessica's sister." It was a tiny shift in words, but it felt like a cold knife slipping between my ribs. I was just a background detail in Jessica's perfect story. The psychological toll of that introduction didn't destroy me all at once. Instead, the hurt built up slowly, like dust choking the air in a locked room, quietly suffocating my self-worth. The clearest memory of that coldness was my 12th birthday. I sat at the kitchen island, listening to the wall clock tick, my stomach tied in knots. My parents had forgotten the cake. My mother quickly rummaged through the pantry, her jaw tight with irritation, and shoved a single bent candle into a stale leftover grocery store muffin. She flicked a lighter, the flame casting harsh, flickering shadows on her face. "We'll do a real party next year, Sarah," she said. Her voice was flat, carrying no hint of a real apology. "Money is just tight right now. You understand." I nodded, blowing out the flame. The smoke smelled bitter. Exactly 3 weeks later, our front yard buzzed with the deafening roar of an air compressor. For Jessica's 10th birthday, they rented a giant bounce house. A hired magician pulled doves from hats while my parents laughed loudly, handing out expensive party favors to a dozen kids. I stood alone by the wooden fence, watching the bright plastic walls of the bounce house shake. That was the exact second my childhood ended. I realized that love in our house was a strict budget item, and my line was always the first to be erased. By the time I was 15, I was waking up before the sun. I walked in the freezing dark to a local bakery, scrubbing heavy metal pans and frosting cupcakes just to buy my own school notebooks. Jessica never had to lift a finger. My mother happily swiped her credit card for Jessica's new clothes, the newest phones, whatever she pointed at. I wore my cousin's faded hand-me-downs, learning how to stretch a single dollar until my hands ached. When I turned 17, I handed over a heavy envelope of crumpled cash I had hidden in my closet for 8 months. I bought a 2008 Honda Accord. The bumper was smashed in, and the air conditioning only blew hot Texas air, but gripping that sticky steering wheel felt like true freedom. That car was proof of every early morning shift, every burn mark on my forearms from the bakery ovens, and every birthday I spent working instead of celebrating. 3 years later, Jessica barely graduated high school with a 2.6 GPA. I had graduated with a 3.9 while working 25 hours a week. "Come out to the driveway." My father called out one afternoon, holding a camera, his face flushed with excitement. A brand new, cherry red Mazda 3 sat gleaming in the sun. The leather seats smelled expensive. Jessica shrieked, jumping up and down before hugging the hood of the car. I stood frozen on the porch, my keys to the dented Honda heavy in my pocket. My mother caught my eye. Her joyful smile faded into a sharp warning glare. She marched up the steps, stepping uncomfortably close to me. "She deserves it," my mother whispered fiercely, her eyes locking onto mine, making sure I caught the hidden meaning. "She worked so hard in school." I didn't hate my sister, but standing there, listening to the new engine purr, My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I realized then that love in my family was a product they were selling, and I was the only one paying the brutal price. The sizzle of Wagyu beef hitting a scorching cast-iron skillet filled the room. I was 24, standing in the pristine stainless steel kitchen of a wealthy Austin tech CEO. My white chef's coat was crisp, my knives were razor-sharp. After 2 brutal years of working 80-hour weeks, I had clawed my way out of the grease and smoke of being a line cook to become an executive private chef. For the first time in my life, I held real power. I had a massive salary. I lived in a tiny, drafty studio apartment and ate scraps, but my bank account was finally heavy. Every spare dollar was locked tightly into a high-yield savings CD, the seed money for my dream bakery. I was building a fortress around my future. Then my phone vibrated against the cold marble counter. The screen flashed. Mom. A sudden familiar weight dropped into my stomach. The kitchen was 80 degrees, but a chill ran down my arms. I wiped my hands on a damp towel, turned the gas burner down to a low blue flicker and answered. Sarah, it's an emergency. Her voice was tight, high-pitched. It wasn't the soft melodic tone she used when speaking to Jessica. It was a sharp, brittle sound that demanded immediate attention. I gripped the edge of the counter. What happened? I heard a ragged breath through the speaker. A long, unnatural pause. Your father. She let the silence stretch, forcing me to imagine the worst. He lost his job. We can't make the mortgage this month. We need $4,000, or the bank is going to take the house. $4,000. My mind raced, slamming into the exact numbers of my finances. My bakery savings were locked away, untouchable without massive penalties. But I had a plastic emergency credit card hidden in my wallet, kept at a zero balance for my own safety net. The limit was exactly $4,000. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. They are going to lose the house, I thought. A good daughter fixes this. If I saved them, maybe she would finally look at me with that same warm pride she gave my sister. I have a card, I whispered into the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. I can take a cash advance. Oh, Sarah, she breathed. I logged into my banking app right there in that multi-million-dollar kitchen. My thumb hovered over the screen. Taking a maximum cash advance felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. The interest rates were predatory, but I pressed confirm. I wired the money directly to their account. It's done, I told her, my voice shaking slightly. Thank you, sweetheart. The panic in her voice vanished instantly. It was replaced by a smooth, deeply satisfied hum. We knew we could count on you. You're making such good money now. We knew you wouldn't let your family drown. Click. The next 4 months were a waking nightmare. By day I cooked truffles, buttery lobster and gold leaf desserts for my boss. By night I went home to my dark studio and boiled cheap salty ramen. To pay off that crushing high-interest credit card debt, I took on brutal weekend catering gigs. I scrubbed industrial baking pans until the skin on my knuckles cracked open and bled. The stinging hot water washing over my raw hands was a daily reminder of my debt. I refused to touch my locked bakery fund. I was surviving on fumes. Then came a quiet Tuesday night. I was sitting on the edge of my cheap mattress, icing my swollen, aching feet. The apartment was completely silent. I opened my phone and scrolled. A photo loaded on my screen. It was my father. He was sitting in a brightly lit booth at Red Lobster, holding up a massive crab leg with a wide, carefree grin on his face. Tagged by my mother. The caption read, "Treating ourselves. So blessed." I stopped breathing. The ice pack slipped off my foot and hit the floor with a wet thud. I swiped down. Another photo loaded. Jessica, draped in a plush, expensive white robe, her hair wrapped in a towel, cucumber slices over her eyes. The caption glowed under the screen's harsh light. Mommy-daughter bonding at the spa today. The cold reality washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. They weren't starving. They weren't fighting for survival. I was bleeding myself dry, working until my hands cracked, to fund their luxury. That was the test, wasn't it? And I had passed it perfectly. I had proven I would break my own back to keep them comfortable. What I didn't know as I sat alone in the dark that night, staring at their smiling faces, was that this first emergency was just the opening act of a 10-year robbery, and I was the only one paying for the tickets. As my career grew, so did their hunger. Once my parents realized my title had changed, the frantic emergencies morphed into a quiet, cold routine. The demand stabilized at exactly $3,000 every single month. It became a utility bill I couldn't cancel. On the first of every month, I would sit in the dark glow of my laptop screen and watch the money drain from my account. A heavy, familiar ache would settle in my chest. I justified it. I told myself, a good daughter provides. I truly believed that if I just poured enough money into that endless hole, if I just proved my worth in dollars, eventually I would feel that warm, proud hand on my shoulder. The one Jessica got for free. I was 30 when the cycle finally broke. It was a freezing December night. I was catering a massive charity gala downtown. The ballroom was a chaotic sea of clinking crystal glasses, glittering diamonds and loud empty laughter. I stood exhausted behind a heat lamp carving station. My back throbbed and my feet were completely numb. Hundreds of people walked past me, looking right through me, only seeing the chef's coat. Then, David Hayes stepped up to the line. He didn't fit in with the billionaires. He wore a simple, slightly faded navy blazer. I would later learn he drove an old Ford Focus. But what stopped me was his face. When he reached the front of the line, he didn't look down at the silver platters of food. He looked directly into my eyes. "You look like you've been carrying this entire room on your shoulders," he said. His voice was quiet, steady, and cut right through the loud ballroom noise. He was a software engineer, thoughtful, observant, and calm. We started dating, and he brought a sudden deep peace into my life that I had never known. When he looked at me, he didn't calculate what I could do for him. He just saw me. 4 months later, that peace was shattered by a single question. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon. The apartment was quiet except for the steady drumming of rain against the window pane. We were sitting at my cramped kitchen table. David was helping me set up a budget spreadsheet for my future bakery. Logic and numbers were his comfort zone. Suddenly, the rapid clicking of his keyboard stopped. I looked up from my coffee. David was staring at the screen, his brow furrowed. The silence in the room suddenly felt thick and heavy. "Sarah," he started. His tone was completely neutral, which terrified me. He pointed a finger at the screen. "Why is there a recurring transfer of $3,000 every month?" My throat instantly closed up. My hands turned ice cold. I felt like a criminal caught standing over a vault. No one had ever asked me that before. I had kept my financial bleeding a deep, shameful secret. It's for my parents," I mumbled, staring down at my hands. David turned his body toward me. "Every month. Sarah, this is more than most people pay in rent." I froze. A sudden violent wave of panic and guilt crashed over me. I felt the overwhelming urge to defend my parents, to defend my own exploitation. "Because if I don't do it, I'm a bad daughter," I blurted out. The words hung in the quiet room. I slapped a hand over my mouth, shocked by the ugly raw truth of my own voice. David slowly pushed his laptop away. He didn't yell, he didn't judge me, he just looked at me with those steady brown eyes, reading the decades of deeply ingrained trauma etched into my face. "What if we tracked it?" he asked softly. "Every dollar you've sent them since you started working, just so you know exactly where you stand." I was terrified, but I nodded. We stayed at that kitchen table as the sun went down and the room turned pitch black, lit only by the harsh blue glow of the screen. We built a monster. We typed out dates, amounts, and the lies I had been told in the notes column. Emergency car repair, Jessica's college textbooks, sudden medical bills, mortgage help, again. As we scrolled through the years, the numbers climbed, higher and higher. It was a suffocating, sickening climb. My chest tightened until I was gasping for air. David stopped typing. He reached across the dark table, his warm hand wrapping tightly around my freezing, shaking fingers. "You're not a bad daughter, Sarah," he whispered into the quiet dark. "Love isn't supposed to be a loan you can never pay off." I broke down and cried until my ribs ached. That spreadsheet wouldn't just become a list of numbers. It would become the most important, devastating document of my entire life. I had wanted to own a bakery since I was 17 years old. The dream didn't start in a fancy culinary school. It started with my grandmother, my mother's mother. You would never know they were related by how differently they looked at me. Grandma Eleanor lived in a tiny, drafty cottage. The air inside always smelled heavy and warm, like roasted cinnamon and browning butter. She taught me how to make her famous cinnamon rolls from scratch. I would stand on a wooden stool, kneading the heavy dough until the muscles in my arms burned and my knuckles ached. "You have a gift, Sarah," she would say, her flour-dusted hands resting gently over mine. These hands were made to create something sweet in a world that's often bitter. She died when I was 21. She left me nothing but a worn wooden recipe box and a silver locket. I wore that locket every single day, feeling the cool metal against my chest as the only proof that I had ever been truly loved. The dream of the bakery stayed alive, a quiet fire burning in the background of my life. By 31, I was still grinding as an executive chef, but I had started taking custom cake orders on my rare weekends off. I would stand in my cramped kitchen at 2 a.m, my eyes burning with exhaustion, piping intricate sugar lace onto massive wedding cakes. Every dollar I made was aggressively shoved into my savings. I was building a wall brick by brick toward a small storefront with my name painted on the glass. When I finally hit a milestone in my savings, I decided to tell my mother. I was sitting on her expensive leather sofa, the sofa my monthly transfers had paid for. The house was dead quiet, except for the distant mindless chatter of the television where my father sat staring blankly at the screen. I told her my plan, my voice carrying a desperate foolish hope for just a fraction of the excitement she showered on Jessica. My mother stopped polishing the glass coffee table. She slowly straightened up. A chilling micro-expression of panic flashed across her eyes. Her mind wasn't thinking about my happiness. It was doing rapid math. A new business means risk. Risk means the $3,000 monthly payments might stop. She let out a sharp mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceiling. A bakery, Sarah? Please, be realistic. She shook her head, her tone dripping with condescending pity. Do you have any idea how many small businesses fail in the first 12 months? You have a highly paid, stable job. Why on earth would you throw that away? How would you help the family? There it was, the real question. From the other couch, Jessica didn't even bother to look up from her glowing phone screen. Are you seriously going to sell cupcakes for a living? She drawled, popping a piece of gum. That's so quaint. I looked at my father. He just reached for the remote and turned the volume up a single notch, drowning us out. He never said a word. That Christmas, the message became crystal clear. We sat around the massive, glittering tree. My mother dragged a heavy, oddly shaped box out for Jessica. Jessica ripped the paper away, squealing as she uncovered a set of premium titanium golf clubs. For networking, Mom explained smoothly, beaming at her golden child. Then my mother reached into her pocket. She didn't even wrap it. She simply slid a flat, plastic $25 Target gift card across the coffee table toward me. It sat there, staring up at me. My dreams weren't worth investing in. My only value was the steady stream of cash I pumped into their lives. But I kept baking. I kept saving. Some dreams are too precious to let cold people freeze them to death. 2 months later, David drove me to Round Rock to meet his parents, William and Margaret Hayes. I sat in the passenger seat, my stomach twisted into tight, painful knots. I was terrified. I was so used to being measured and judged. I expected a cold interrogation. We pulled up to a modest, brick colonial house. The walkway was lined with deep red rose bushes. It wasn't a showpiece like my parents' house. It looked lived in. It looked safe. Before David could even knock, the front door swung open. Margaret stood there, wiping her hands on an apron. She didn't offer a stiff, polite handshake. She stepped right past her son and pulled me into a fierce, warm hug. You must be Sarah, she said, her eyes crinkling with genuine joy. David has told us so much about you. Come in, out of the cold. I just pulled the pot roast out. I stepped inside. The air smelled savory and rich. The dining table was set with real cloth napkins and flickering candles. William stood up from his chair. He was a tall man with sharp, intelligent eyes, but his handshake was remarkably gentle. As we sat down, William passed me the warm bread basket. He looked right at me, giving me his complete attention. So Sarah, he said, his voice deep and steady. David tells me you're a remarkably talented chef, but tell me, what is your true specialty? I froze. The silver fork in my hand trembled slightly. No one had ever asked me that. My own parents had never once asked about my work, my passions, or what made me feel alive. I swallowed hard, fighting the sudden tight lump in my throat. Pastry, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I want to open a bakery someday. Margaret's face instantly lit up. It wasn't a forced, polite smile. It was pure, uncalculated excitement. Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful. William, isn't that wonderful? It is, William agreed. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You know, I work in commercial real estate. When you're ready to start looking at storefront spaces, let me know. I might be able to help you navigate the lease negotiations. I sat perfectly still, staring at this man I had met exactly 20 minutes ago. He was casually offering to help me build the exact dream my own family had viciously mocked. He wasn't asking for a cut. He wasn't looking for a payoff. On the dark drive home that night, the rain started to fall again. The rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers was the only sound in the car. I turned my head toward the window, and the tears I had been holding back for 31 years finally broke loose. I cried silently, my shoulders shaking. Sarah, what's wrong? David asked, his voice spiking with alarm as he reached for my hand. Nothing's wrong, I whispered, wiping my wet cheeks. I didn't know it could feel like this. Feel like what? Like being wanted, without having to pay for it. Looking out at the blurred streetlights, I understood exactly what had been stolen from me my entire life. And I swore to myself, right then in the dark, that I would never let anyone treat me like a transaction again. Then Jessica got engaged, and the slow, quiet bleeding of my bank account turned into a slaughter. She met Tyler at a loud, overpriced rooftop bar downtown. Tyler was a stockbroker with slicked back hair, expensive cologne that arrived in a room before he did, and a heavy gold Rolex he deliberately unbuttoned his cuffs to show off. Within 5 months, there was a massive diamond on Jessica's finger. Within 6 months, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I stared at the screen. The caller ID read, "Mom." My chest tightened. My pulse thumped heavily in my ears. I knew exactly what this call was. "Sarah." She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how my day was. "We need to discuss your contribution to the wedding fund." I wiped flour from my hands with a damp towel, my stomach dropping. "My contribution? $18,000, Sarah. That's your share." The towel slipped from my fingers, hitting the linoleum floor with a soft slap. The kitchen suddenly felt completely devoid of oxygen. "My share? Mom, what are you talking about? I'm working double shifts just to build my bakery fund. I can't just hand over $18,000. A sharp, humorless laugh barked through the speaker. "Your future?" she mocked, the syllables dripping with disdain. "Jessica is getting married now. This is her special day. Tyler's family is very established. You can play with your little baking hobby next year." "It's not a hobby, Mom. I've been saving for years." There was a long, heavy pause. The air through the phone seemed to turn freezing cold. Then the tactic changed. The tears started. They weren't the quiet, gentle tears of genuine pain. These were loud, gasping, theatrical sobs. She deployed them like a calculated military strike. "How can you be so incredibly selfish?" she choked out, her voice vibrating with weaponized guilt. "Do you want me to die of embarrassment in front of Tyler's parents? They are wealthy, Sarah. We have to make a good impression. If you don't do this, you are single-handedly ruining your sister's life." I squeezed my eyes shut. My hands were shaking. Every fiber of my being screamed to hang up, to say no. But decades of deep psychological conditioning locked my jaw. I was terrified of being the villain in her story. I broke. That night, sitting in the dark, I wired $12,000. I watched the confirmation screen load, realizing I had just wiped out years of burned forearms, aching feet, and sleepless nights. I had bought their temporary approval, and it cost me my dream. Jessica's wedding was held at the Barton Creek Country Club. It was a suffocating display of excess. There were towering, 6-foot ice sculptures melting slowly into silver drip trays and a live 12-piece jazz band. Jessica glided across the marble floors in a custom Vera Wang gown. I stood silently in the corner of the crowded ballroom. My mother had specifically selected my bridesmaid dress. It was a dull, dusty pink, made of stiff, heavy fabric that itched against my skin. "We just want something that won't draw any attention away from the bride," she had told me, handing over the plastic garment bag. Not a single person thanked me. Not for the dress, not for the money, not for the years of survival I had sacrificed to pay for the open bar. Later that evening, I was walking past a towering floral arrangement when I heard my mother's voice. She was standing with Tyler's parents, swirling a glass of expensive champagne. "Oh, we're so proud of both our girls, of course," my mother laughed, her voice carrying over the music. She leaned in closer to Tyler's mother, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "But Jessica, well, Jessica has always been the special one." I stopped dead in my tracks. The loud ballroom noise faded into a dull, ringing static. The truth, spoken out loud to total strangers, felt like a physical punch to the throat. I didn't cause a scene. I forced a hollow wooden smile onto my face, picked up a bottle from the catering table and just kept pouring champagne. 3 years later, it was my turn to walk down the aisle, and I would learn exactly what special meant. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in May. David took my hand and led me into the tangled, overgrown garden where Grandma Eleanor used to live. The little cottage had been sold years ago to strangers, but David had quietly tracked down the new owners and asked for permission to bring me there. The air smelled intensely of wet earth, wild rosemary, and blooming thyme. Raindrops slipped through the heavy green leaves. David stopped under the old oak tree. He didn't say a long, rehearsed speech. He just looked at me with those incredibly steady, honest eyes, and knelt directly into the damp, muddy earth. He opened a small velvet box. It wasn't a diamond. It was a deep ocean blue sapphire. I gasped, my hand flying to my chest. It was the stone from Grandma Eleanor's locket. For months, David had secretly worked with a jeweler to remove the gem and set it into a delicate vintage gold band. He had taken the only piece of history where I felt loved, and forged it into my future. I was crying so hard I said yes before his knee even touched the ground. That night, Floating on a high of pure electric happiness, I made the mistake of calling my mother. I wanted just for one night to be the daughter with the good news. Engaged? My mother's voice was completely flat. There was no gasp, no squeal. To the computer guy? What exactly does his family do? The joy in my chest instantly deflated, like a punctured lung. He's a software engineer, Mom. And his parents are wonderful, kind people. But are they established? The rapid mental calculations were almost audible over the line. What kind of wedding can they afford to throw? I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. I didn't call to discuss a financial portfolio, Mom. I called to tell you my life is starting. I'm getting married. A long, suffocating pause filled the line. Well, she finally sighed. At least he has a stable job. I suppose that's something. Not a single congratulations. No tears of happiness. An hour later, my phone lit up with a text from Jessica. You're getting married before our 3-year anniversary. Kind of tacky TBH. David found me standing in the dark kitchen, staring blankly at the glowing screen. He didn't need to ask. He saw the way my shoulders slumped, the way the light had completely drained from my eyes. They didn't take it well, did they? He asked quietly, stepping up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. They didn't take it at all, I whispered, resting my head back against his chest. They just inventoried it, like I was announcing a corporate merger instead of the happiest day of my life. He pulled me tighter, kissing the top of my head. Then we'll celebrate with people who actually care. My parents are already planning a dinner. I should have known then. The warning signs were flashing in neon red. But hope is a stubborn, deeply foolish thing. Despite the coldness, despite the cruelty, a tiny bruised part of my heart still believed that when my actual wedding day arrived, my parents would put it all aside. I still believed they would show up. 7 months before the wedding, I stood inside a dusty, abandoned storefront on South Congress Avenue. The air smelled of old wood and stale dust, but to me it smelled like a future. I signed the lease on a folding table. Golden Crumb Bakery was finally real. William Hayes had found the space. He sat across from me, sliding the heavy stack of lease papers forward. The rent is manageable, he said, his voice a steady grounding anchor. And the old ovens in the back still work. You just need to breathe some life into this place. But I was barely breathing myself. I was stretched so thin I felt my mind fraying at the edges. By day I cooked for the CEO. By night I scraped old paint off the bakery walls until my fingernails bled. And on the 1st of every month my phone would ping. Another $3,000 drained from my account, sent directly to my parents. I was building a business on a razor's edge, terrified of a single missed paycheck. Yet I refused to stop the transfers. I was trapped in the invisible cage of my own guilt. A week later, that secret cage broke open. I was sitting at William and Margaret's warm oak dining table. We were organizing a massive pile of my business tax documents. I was exhausted, rubbing my burning eyes when the rustling of papers suddenly stopped. The silence in the room grew heavy. I looked up. William was frozen. He was holding a thick stack of my bank statements. He wasn't looking at the bakery expenses. His eyes were locked on the recurring transfers column. His gaze moved slowly down the page, his brow pulling together in deep, quiet shock. Pay Richard and Linda Mitchell, $3,000. Month after month, year after year, page after page. A hot flush of deep, ugly shame crept up my neck. I reached out, my instinct screaming to snatch the papers away and hide the evidence of my own pathetic desperation. William, it's just family stuff, I stammered. He didn't hand them back. He slowly lowered the papers to the table. He took off his reading glasses. He didn't look at me with pity, and he didn't judge me. Instead, his eyes were filled with a profound, heartbreaking recognition. He saw exactly what was being done to me. Sarah, William said. His voice was incredibly soft, almost a whisper in the quiet room. You have done more than your duty. I want you to know that. I swallowed hard, looking away. I didn't realize until much later that William, having witnessed the truth, would become the armor I needed. 2 months before the wedding, I drove to my parents' house to deliver the save-the-date cards. I had designed them myself. Thick cream paper with tiny pressed lavender flowers. I walked into their spotless, cold kitchen. My heart hammered a foolish, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. Maybe this will make it real to them, I thought. Maybe seeing it in print will spark something. I slid the beautiful envelope across the marble island toward my mother. She didn't smile. She wiped her hands on a towel, picked it up and narrowed her eyes. October 12th, she muttered. She didn't say, how beautiful. She didn't say, I can't wait. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb scrolling rapidly through her calendar. A heavy sigh escaped her lips. Sarah, this is right near Jessica's birthday. You know she turns 30 on the 14th. The air in the kitchen turned instantly stale. I know when Jessica's birthday is, Mom, I said, my voice dangerously tight. But my wedding is on the 12th. She clicked her tongue, dropping the invitation onto the counter next to a pile of junk mail like it was a useless coupon. Well, we might have plans. Jessica wandered into the kitchen just then, eyes glued to her screen. She opened the fridge, grabbed a yogurt, and glanced sideways at the card. Oh, your wedding thing, she mumbled, peeling the foil lid back. Tyler wants to go to Cancun that weekend for a getaway. I'll try to make it, but no promises. In the living room, my father sat in his recliner. The golf tournament on the TV blared loudly. He didn't even turn his head. I walked out to my car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I called David, my chest heaving with dry, silent sobs. They didn't even commit, I choked out, gripping the steering wheel. They said they might have plans, for my wedding day. A long silence filled the car. Sarah, David said gently. Maybe it's time to accept that your family simply isn't capable of being what you need. They'll come, I insisted, blinded by decades of desperate conditioning. When the actual day arrives, they'll be there. I know they will. 6 weeks later, that final illusion was slaughtered. It was a bright Thursday afternoon. I was standing in a high-end bridal shop downtown. I was surrounded by tall gold-rimmed mirrors, looking at my reflection from every angle. I was wearing the dress. It was ivory silk, heavy and perfect, pooling around my feet like water. I finally felt like a bride. Then, my phone vibrated in my purse. I smiled at the shop assistant stepping off the pedestal to grab it. Mom. Hi, Mom, I said, my voice light. I'm actually at my final fitting right now. Sarah, I need to tell you something. The tone of her voice was completely flat. It was the exact voice she used when reading a grocery list. No emotion, no hesitation. The temperature in the fitting room seemed to instantly plunge. Your father and I won't be able to make it to the wedding. The shop assistant, who was kneeling to adjust my hem, completely froze. The entire room went dead silent. Only the faint ticking of the wall clock remained. I stared at the woman in the mirror. She looked like a ghost wrapped in white silk. What do you mean you won't be able to make it? My voice cracked. October 12th is Jessica's birthday weekend, my mother said smoothly. Tyler is throwing her an early party on the 12th because it works better for his wealthy colleagues. We can't miss our daughter's milestone birthday celebration. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. The edges of my vision blurred. Mom, her birthday is the 14th. I am getting married on the 12th. Sweetheart, your sister only turns 30 once. The casual cruelty of her words sliced through me like a razor blade. You could have picked a different date. My breath hitched. My chest felt like it was being crushed under a block of concrete. You're choosing a networking birthday party over your own daughter's wedding. Oh, don't be dramatic, Sarah, she snapped, annoyed by my emotion. You know how important these connections are for Jessica. You've always been so independent. You'll be fine without us. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I looked at the call timer on the screen. 52 seconds. It took exactly 52 seconds to dismantle 34 years of desperate hoping. I slowly brought the phone back to my mouth. The little girl inside me, the one who had spent her whole life working for a single crumb of love, quietly died on the floor of that fitting room. I understand, I said. My voice was no longer shaking. It was cold, hollow, dead. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I turned back to the mirror, looked at the beautiful white dress, and realized I was finally completely free. The drive home was a blur of gray concrete and red taillights. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the steady hum of the tires against the road. When I turned the key in the lock of our apartment, the door clicked open to the smell of roasted garlic and warm bread. David was standing at the stove, a dish towel thrown over his shoulder. He turned, a smile forming on his face, but it vanished the second he saw my eyes. Sarah, he dropped the wooden spoon onto the counter. What's wrong? I walked to the kitchen island and set my purse down. The leather made a soft thud. I repeated every single word my mother had said. I didn't cry. My voice was completely flat, reciting the syllables like I was reading a weather report. Every careful, cruel word she had used to carve the final piece out of my heart hung in the warm air of our kitchen. David didn't rage. He didn't pace or throw things. He just crossed the room, wrapped his arms around me, and pulled me tightly against his chest. I felt his heartbeat against my cheek, steady, strong and real. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his chin resting on top of my head. I pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I don't know." I paused, taking a slow, deep breath. The freezing numbness inside me was suddenly melting into a hard, sharp clarity. "Actually, that's not true. I do know." Later that night, long after dinner was cleared away, the apartment fell into a heavy silence. It was 2 a.m. I sat alone at the small kitchen table. The only light in the room came from the harsh blue glow of my phone screen lying flat on the wood. The banking app was open. My pulse pounded in my throat. I navigated through the menus, my finger trembling slightly as I found the page. Recurring transfers. There it was, a neat digital line of text that had controlled my entire adult life. Pay Richard and Linda Mitchell. Scheduled for the first. 10 years. 120 months. $360,000. David and I had tallied the exact number months ago, but seeing it represented by this one small button felt completely different. That money was a down payment on a house. It was a college fund. It was the foundation of an entire life. And in return, I couldn't even buy their presents for a single afternoon. My finger hovered exactly 1 inch over the red cancel button. My chest was tight. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. "You don't have to decide tonight," David said softly. I jumped slightly. He was standing in the dark hallway, watching me. "Yes, I do." I looked at him, my eyes burning. "If I wait until the sun comes up, I'll talk myself out of it. The guilt will creep back in. I'll tell myself that maybe they'll change their minds. Maybe I'm just overreacting. But I'm not overreacting, David. Am I?" "No," he said resolutely, stepping into the kitchen. "You're not." I turned my eyes back to the glowing screen. I took one final shaking breath and pressed cancel. A small box popped up. "Are you sure?" I pressed confirm. The screen blinked. It refreshed. The recurring transfer vanished, replaced by a blank white space. The chain snapped. I didn't send a text to explain. I didn't call to argue or beg for them to understand. I simply closed the app, turned off the phone, and let the room go completely dark. I stopped giving. Now, I would wait to see if anyone would notice me for anything other than my money. They would notice, but not the way I desperately hoped. On October 12th, the autumn sky over Austin was a brilliant, flawless blue. The air was crisp and clear. I married the love of my life in the lush green backyard of William and Margaret Hayes' home. 95 guests gathered under a beautiful canopy of warm string lights and white roses. The weather felt like it had been designed specifically for new beginnings. David's colleagues sat shoulder to shoulder with my coworkers from the sweaty, chaotic culinary world. Friends from high school laughed with the early loyal regulars from Golden Crumb Bakery. From my entire side of the family, exactly one person showed up: Aunt Barbara, my mother's younger sister. She was the family's black sheep, the woman who had been frozen out and entirely cut off 10 years ago because she refused to lend my parents money. She drove 5 hours through the morning fog just to be there. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world, Sarah," she said, her voice rough with emotion as she crushed me into a tight hug. She smelled like peppermint and expensive perfume. "Grandma Eleanor would have been so incredibly proud of you today." Upstairs in the guest room, Margaret helped me step into my ivory dress. She didn't try to replace my mother. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply stepped into the massive, aching gap with total grace. Her warm hand smoothed down my veil. She gently dabbed at the stray tears that kept threatening to fall from my eyes. "You're not losing anything today, sweetheart," Margaret whispered, looking at my reflection in the mirror. "You are gaining everything you actually deserve." When the music started, William was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He had offered his arm the day before, quietly and without any pressure. "Only if you want me to," he had said. "No obligation, Sarah." But when I slipped my arm through his, I felt the incredible solid steadiness of his presence. I knew I had made the right choice. We walked down the aisle together, stepping over fallen autumn leaves. I had baked my own wedding cake. It wasn't a traditional towering white fondant creation. It was a rustic lemon lavender cake, made exactly from Grandma Eleanor's faded recipe card. Nothing about this wedding was traditional. It was built entirely from scratch, piece by piece, by people who actually wanted to be there. That night, long after the cake was cut, David and I danced slowly under the dark, starry sky. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves above us. I closed my eyes and leaned against his chest. For the first time in 34 years, the heavy, crushing weight of trying to earn my family's love was gone. I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a little girl in my grandmother's kitchen: pure, unbroken peace. The absence of my parents still ached, like a phantom limb. But the deep, warm presence of my chosen family filled spaces I hadn't even known were empty. 3 weeks after my honeymoon, the storm finally hit. I was standing alone in the quiet kitchen of Golden Crumb Bakery. It was early morning, and the air was thick with the sweet, heavy scent of vanilla and melted sugar. I was carefully smoothing pale pink buttercream over a 3-tier anniversary cake. As a chef, I knew that frosting required absolute control. One shaky hand, one moment of rushing, and the entire smooth surface would be ruined. You had to stay perfectly steady. Then, my phone buzzed against the metal prep table. The screen lit up the dim room. Mom. My metal spatula stopped moving. My heart did a slow, painful flip in my chest. For a split second, the terrified little girl inside me wanted to hide. But I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and picked it up. "Hello?" I said. My voice was calm. "Sarah, there must be some mistake with your bank." Her voice wasn't warm. It was clipped, fast, and highly annoyed. "The transfer didn't come through this month. Did you get a new card?" "There's no mistake, Mom," I said smoothly. A heavy, static-filled silence stretched over the line. I could picture her standing in her massive, spotless kitchen, her brain struggling to process the impossible. The ATM had just refused her PIN. "What do you mean?" she demanded, her tone sharpening into a weapon. "I mean exactly what I said. I stopped the transfers. I'm not sending money anymore." "You stopped?" She let out a sharp, breathless laugh that held zero humor. "You can't just stop, Sarah. We depend on that money. Your father and I have bills to pay." "I know you have bills. I've been paying them for 10 years. "Exactly," she snapped, thinking she had caught me. "So you understand how important—" "I understand that you chose Jessica's networking birthday party over my wedding," I interrupted. I didn't yell. I kept my voice as level as a sheet of ice. "I understand that after giving you $360,000, I couldn't even get you to show up for one afternoon to watch me get married." The silence returned, but this time it was dangerous. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to a cold, vicious whisper. "So, this is revenge. You're throwing a tantrum. You're punishing us." "No, Mom. This isn't about you at all. This is me finally taking care of my own family. David and I are building a life. I am running a business. I can't keep funding a family that treats me like an ATM with a heartbeat. How dare you?" Her voice cracked like a whip. "I am your mother. You are being incredibly selfish." "I'm not asking for your permission," I said, my hand resting flat on the cool metal table. "I'm informing you of a permanent change." "Sarah Marie Mitchell," she hissed, the venom fully unmasked. "If you do this, you will deeply regret it. Family is forever. When you fall on your face and need us, we will not be there for you." I almost laughed. A dry, painful sound escaped my throat. When had they ever been there for me? "Goodbye, Mom," I whispered, and ended the call. I set the phone down. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. She had said I would regret it, but 8 months later, she would be the one drowning in regret. The guilt trip campaign launched within 72 hours. First came Dad's call. It was the first time he had voluntarily dialed my number in years. "Sarah, honey," he sighed heavily into the phone, playing the exhausted peacemaker. "Your mother's been crying for 3 days straight. She can't eat. She can't sleep. You're breaking her heart. She broke mine first, Dad." That's not the same thing," he stammered, caught off guard by my pushback. "We're your parents. We sacrificed so much to raise you girls." "Did you sacrifice, Dad? Or did I?" He didn't have an answer. He just hung up. Then came Jessica's text messages, firing into my phone like bullets. "Mom told me what you did. How could you be so cruel? They literally raised you and this is how you repay them. You're being incredibly toxic. Some of us don't make as much money as you do." I didn't reply to a single one. The only voice of absolute sanity came a week later. Aunt Barbara called me while I was sweeping the bakery floors late at night. "Your mother phoned me asking for money," Barbara said dryly. The broom in my hand stopped. First time she's spoken to me in 6 years. I told her exactly what I told her back then. Not my problem. "Did she say anything about me?" I asked quietly, leaning against the counter. "Oh, plenty. According to her, you've become a heartless, greedy monster. She said you abandoned the family in their darkest hour." Barbara paused. The line hummed with quiet tension. "Sarah, do you know what your mother did to your grandmother?" My grip on the wooden broom handle tightened. "What?" "The exact same thing she did to you. She bled Eleanor dry until there was absolutely nothing left. She took her savings, her retirement, everything. And when Eleanor finally ran out of money, your mother blamed her for not having more to give. That's why I stopped talking to her. I stopped breathing. The pattern, the invisible crushing cycle. It had been right in front of me my entire life. I wasn't uniquely unlovable. I was just the next victim in line. That night, the doubts came crawling back in the dark. It was 4 a.m. The apartment was completely silent. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake David, and crept into the kitchen. The floor tiles were freezing against my bare feet. I slid down the cabinets and sat on the cold floor, pulling my knees to my chest. My phone was in my hand. The screen glowed harshly in the pitch black. My finger hovered over my mother's contact name. The psychological addiction to their approval was a physical ache in my bones. One call, my exhausted brain whispered. One apology, one transfer, and everything goes back to normal. The fighting stops. I stared at the screen, my thumb trembling. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, wanting to jump just to end the suspense of falling. A warm hand gently covered my phone. I looked up. David was sitting down on the cold tile right next to me. He didn't look angry. He just looked at me with deep, steady compassion. I keep thinking I should just fix it, I whispered, tears finally spilling over my cheeks. Just send the money again. Make them happy. David slowly pulled the phone out of my hand and set it face down on the floor. Would that make you happy, Sarah? He asked softly. The question hung in the quiet dark. I let out a long, shuddering breath and rested my head on his shoulder. I didn't have to answer. We sat there together until the sun came up. 9 months passed. Life didn't just move on, it began to bloom. Golden Crumb Bakery found its rhythm. In February, a popular food blogger wandered in and wrote a glowing review, a hidden gem tucked away on South Congress. The best cinnamon rolls in Texas. Within a week, the line was stretching out the door. I hired 2 part-time employees. My dream was fully alive, a warm golden reality built with my own 2 hands. And then, on a rainy morning in May, I sat on the edge of my bathtub, staring at a little plastic stick. 2 bright pink lines. I was pregnant. When David saw the test, he dropped his keys, lifted me entirely off the floor, and spun me around in the tiny bathroom. We were both laughing and crying at the same time. We're having a baby, he kept repeating, pressing his forehead against mine. Margaret wept openly when we told her. William hugged me so tightly my ribs popped, making terrible joyful jokes about teaching the baby how to read a real estate contract. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it felt like to be celebrated simply for existing. My own parents remained completely silent. After months of ignored texts, they had stopped trying to reach me. I assumed they had simply found some other way to pay their bills. I assumed they were fine. I was completely wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Aunt Barbara called again. Sarah, she said, her voice unusually grave. You need to know what's happening, before it blows up. What is it? I asked, wiping flour from the counter. Jessica convinced your parents to invest their remaining savings in a guaranteed opportunity that Tyler discovered. It was a Ponzi scheme. Sarah, run by Tyler's cousin. $100,000, completely gone in 4 months. The cousin disappeared. I stared blankly at the wall. Oh my God. It gets worse, Barbara continued grimly. Tyler and Jessica are getting a vicious divorce. And your parents, Sarah, they used the $3,000 you had been sending every month to qualify for the loan on that massive house. They used your cash as their safety net. Without your money, and with their savings gone. She took a deep breath. They are 4 months behind on the mortgage. The bank is foreclosing. They are going to lose the house. I should have felt a massive rush of victory. Instead, a heavy bone-deep exhaustion settled over me. My phone vibrated against the nightstand, breaking the quiet of the bedroom. The harsh white light of the screen lit up the dark. Jessica. Hey sis, can we talk? I know we haven't been close lately, but family is family, right? BTW Mom mentioned you're doing really well with the business. We should celebrate. Maybe you could help us figure out some financial stuff too. There it was, the hook. The desperate casual ask disguised as an olive branch. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't type a single letter in reply, but my heart started to hammer against my ribs. I knew exactly what was coming. The beast was starving, and it knew exactly where I lived. That weekend I prepared for war. I sat at my kitchen table at midnight. The only sound was the mechanical whir and clack of my cheap printer spitting out page after page. I spread 10 years of my life across the worn wooden table. Bank statements, printed and organized perfectly by year. The massive spreadsheet David and I had built was now complete. I took a bright yellow marker and highlighted every single transaction date. The running totals were printed in bold black ink. $360,000. What are you doing? David's voice came from the dark hallway. He stepped into the dim kitchen, setting 2 steaming cups of coffee on the edge of the table. I didn't look up. My eyes were tracing the numbers, making sure I know exactly what happened. I said, my voice barely a whisper. When they show up, and David, they will show up. I want the cold hard facts right in front of me. No tears, no emotions, just facts. On the corner of the table, sitting next to a pile of paper clips, was a small glossy black and white photo. It was the ultrasound image from my 14-week doctor's appointment. A tiny, perfect little heartbeat. I picked it up, my fingers trembling just a little. This is what I am protecting now, I said softly, looking at the grainy shape of my child. My baby will never, ever have to buy their grandmother's love. The 2-year anniversary celebration of Golden Crumb Bakery fell on a crisp, breezy Sunday in early November. I had planned it for months. It felt like a true grand opening. We decorated the little shop with bright autumn leaves and woven baskets. Golden warm lights hung from the ceiling. The glass display cases were overflowing with thick, frosted cinnamon rolls and delicate pastries. The shop was packed. A reporter from the Texas Monthly magazine sat in the corner booth, taking notes for a feature on local women-owned businesses. By 1 p.m. the bakery was humming with loud laughter and the clinking of coffee cups. William, Margaret and David were smiling, handing out napkins and chatting with the regulars. It was a perfect safe haven. Then the brass bell above the front door chimed. It was a normal, cheerful sound, but the hair on the back of my neck instantly stood up. A sudden freezing chill swept through the warm room. I looked up from the cake box I was folding. My mother walked in first. Behind her came my father, his eyes nervously scanning the crowded room like a trapped animal. And behind them both, standing in the doorway, was Jessica. She looked incredibly thin, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Her face was pale and exhausted. The cheerful chatter in the bakery didn't stop all at once, but it shifted. People have a deep, built-in instinct for danger. They could feel the heavy, unnatural tension leaking into the room. I gripped the edge of the counter. My heart slammed against my chest. They're here to break my safe space. My mother's eyes locked onto me. I braced myself for a screaming match. But she didn't march over in a rage. Instead, I watched her sharp eyes flick rapidly around the room. She took in the crowded tables, the successful business, the happy in-laws standing nearby, and the reporter with the notepad. I saw the exact microsecond she changed her strategy. Her face violently crumpled into a mask of pure, devastating tragedy. She was going to play the ultimate victim. Sarah. Oh, my beautiful girl, she said. Her voice was just loud enough to cut through the noise, trembling perfectly to catch everyone's attention. She walked slowly toward the front counter, heavy tears welling up in her eyes. We missed you so much. We had to come. The bakery went completely, totally silent. The clinking of forks stopped. Margaret immediately stepped closer to me, her face hardening. David appeared right at my elbow, his jaw tight. This isn't really the time, Mom, I said. I kept my voice incredibly low and quiet, trying to contain the blast radius. When is the time, Sarah? My mother cried out, pressing a hand to her chest. She dabbed her eyes, ensuring the entire room was watching her performance. You won't answer our calls. You sit here in this beautiful, expensive shop, so successful, while your own father and I are being thrown out onto the street. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. How could you abandon us? She sobbed, stepping closer to the glass case. After everything we sacrificed to feed you and raise you. We are losing our home, Sarah. Please, you have to help your family. She played it flawlessly. To any stranger in the room, she was a poor, desperate, loving mother begging her cold, wealthy daughter for basic survival. I saw Mrs. Henderson, a sweet 65-year-old regular, set her coffee cup down with a deeply concerned frown. The Texas Monthly reporter had stopped eating entirely, her pen hovering over her notebook. Jessica stepped forward, perfectly playing her supporting role. She's right, Sarah, Jessica said, her voice dripping with calculated disappointment. You have this wildly successful business, and you can't even help your own mother pay for a roof over her head. What kind of daughter does that? My blood turned to ice. My fear vanished, replaced by a cold, burning, absolute clarity. What kind of daughter? I repeated in my head. That's a very good question, Jessica, I said out loud. My voice didn't shake. It projected clearly and sharply across the dead-silent bakery. Let me show everyone exactly what kind. I reached slowly under the counter, Part of me had known this exact moment would happen. I pulled out the heavy, thick black binder I had prepared at midnight. "You came into my business to ask for money," I said, my eyes locking onto my mother's fake tears. "You came in here, in front of all these innocent people crying and playing the victim, hoping to publicly shame me into writing you a massive check so they wouldn't judge me. So let's do this properly, Mom. Let's show everyone what being part of this family has really cost." I slapped the heavy folder onto the glass counter. It made a sharp, echoing crack. I flipped it open. "These are official bank statements," I said, sliding the highlighted pages out and spreading them across the glass. 10 years of direct transfers from my bank account to yours, starting from when I was 24 years old. I was working 80-hour weeks as a chef, burning my hands, eating cheap ramen noodles while paying off the credit card I maxed out for your first fake emergency. My mother's tears instantly stopped. The blood drained completely from her face. "Would you like to know the exact total, Mom?" I asked, my voice slicing through the thick air, because everyone else in this room is about to hear it. I looked up at the shocked crowd, then back at her wide, terrified eyes. $360,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb going off. Jessica's mouth fell completely open. My father took a stumbling step backward, staring at the printed documents like they were covered in poison. "Every single month," I continued, my voice rising, hard and unyielding, "I sent you $3,000, plus emergencies. Jessica's luxury wedding, $12,000 straight from my savings. Dad's medical surgery that magically turned out to be a private golf trip to Florida, $9,000. Jessica's spa weekends, all of it paid for by the older daughter you hid in the background." I grabbed one specific page and held it up. The yellow highlight glowed under the lights. "This page is from October 12th, I said. "Notice anything special missing? No transfer from you. No gift. No cheap card. You didn't even show up to my wedding. You abandoned me on the most important day of my life because you chose to go to Jessica's networking birthday party, a party that wasn't even on her actual birthday." Mrs. Henderson let out a loud, horrified gasp. The reporter was writing furiously now, the pen scratching loudly against the paper. "Over $350,000, I whispered fiercely, leaning over the counter. "And I couldn't buy your presents for one single afternoon." I slammed the folder shut. "So no, Mom, I am not abandoning the family. The family abandoned me a very long time ago. I just finally stopped paying the monthly subscription fee." Jessica sputtered, her face flushing bright red. "You're making this all about money, Sarah, when it's supposed to be about love. Is it?" I challenged, staring her down. "Then tell me, Jessica, when was the last time you called me just to ask how I was doing? Not to ask for a favor, not to demand cash, just to see if your sister was okay." Silence, the heavy, suffocating kind of silence. "I'll wait," I said. More silence. Jessica looked at the floor. I took a slow breath and placed my hand firmly on my stomach. "I am pregnant," I said into the quiet room. My mother's head snapped up. "And my child will never have to wonder if their grandmother actually loves them," I said, my voice finally cracking with real emotion. "Because they will have a grandmother who does. She is standing right there." I pointed at Margaret. Margaret was crying quietly, a fierce protective smile on her face. "Sarah, you can't do this to us," my mother's voice finally broke. It wasn't sadness this time. It was the raw, panicked humiliation of being publicly unmasked. "People are watching us. You're embarrassing us." "No, Mom," I said softly. "You embarrassed yourselves the day you chose a cocktail party over my wedding vows. I'm just showing the receipts." I gathered the papers and stacked them neatly. "Leave my bakery. Stop calling my phone. Stop showing up demanding my money. I am living my life with my husband, my real family, and my baby." "Your baby." My mother's eyes dropped to my stomach, her face twisting. "You're having a baby and you weren't even going to tell us." "Why would I?" I asked coldly. "So you could calculate how much a baby would cut into your monthly allowance." My dad finally stepped forward, raising his hands in a weak, trembling gesture. "Sarah, please, be reasonable. I know we've made some mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting to buy a birthday cake, Dad," I said, looking right through him. "Missing a phone call is a mistake. Taking $360,000 and choosing to ignore your daughter's wedding is a choice. And so is what I'm doing right now." I pointed a shaking finger toward the glass door. "Please leave." For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. The air was so tense it felt like it might snap in half. And then, a voice cut through the silence. "Excuse me, Mrs. Henderson." The retired schoolteacher rose slowly from her chair. Her face was dark red with anger. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my mother's face. "I have been coming to this shop for 2 years," the older woman said loudly. "Sarah remembers my sick husband's name every single morning. She saves his favorite muffin. Last month, when I couldn't afford a birthday cake for my grandson, she made a beautiful one anyway and refused to let me pay her a dime. That young woman gave you over $350,000, and you couldn't even bother to show up to her wedding." Mrs. Henderson took a step forward. "You are disgusting. You should be deeply ashamed of yourselves. Get out." A low murmur rippled through the entire bakery. People were nodding. Someone in the back muttered, "Unbelievable." A man near the door actually stood up, crossing his arms. My mother's perfectly crafted composure shattered completely. Stripped of her victim narrative, with an entire room of strangers glaring at her, panic set in. She grabbed my father's arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket, and dragged him toward the door. "Let's go, Richard," she hissed, her face burning. "We don't need to be humiliated by these strangers." "You humiliated yourselves," Mrs. Henderson called out after them. Jessica hesitated at the door. She turned and looked at me. For the first time in her entire life, there was genuine confusion in her eyes. It was the look of a spoiled child finally realizing that actions actually had brutal consequences. The golden shield was gone. "Jessica," I said quietly, "goodbye." She turned away, her shoulders slumping, and followed them out into the street. The brass bell chimed, the heavy glass door swung shut, clicking perfectly into place. And just like that, 34 years of trying to earn my family's love came to a dead, quiet end. Margaret stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. She didn't say a word. She just held me while my heart slowed its frantic beating. David kissed my temple, his hand resting securely on my lower back. The bakery slowly went back to life, the loud chatter replaced by quiet, respectful murmurs. The Texas Monthly reporter closed her notebook and walked up to the counter. "I came here today to write about local women entrepreneurs," she said carefully, her eyes full of quiet respect. "But what just happened, that was something else entirely. Do you want me to leave it out of the story?" "No," I said, my voice finally steady. "Write exactly what you saw. This story isn't about revenge. It's about building a life worth protecting." Before the adrenaline could completely fade from my veins, heavy red and blue lights began flashing through the large front windows of the bakery. The crowd went completely silent again. 2 uniformed police officers pushed open the glass door, the bells chiming cheerfully above them. Their hands rested casually near their belts. They scanned the peaceful room, looking confused. "Sarah Hayes?" the older officer asked, stepping toward the counter. "That's me," I said. "We received a frantic 911 call from a Linda Mitchell," he said, his radio crackling softly in the quiet room. "She claimed she was just aggressively harassed, verbally threatened, and that her daughter was attempting to steal her life savings. She said we needed to intervene immediately." A few customers actually gasped. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel panicked. A deep, cold numbness washed over me. It was a heavy, total emotional detachment. I looked at the officers, realizing my mother had tried to use the police as a final desperate weapon to punish me. She wanted to terrify me into submission. "I'm Sarah," I said flatly. I didn't raise my voice. I simply slid the heavy black binder across the glass counter toward them. "Linda Mitchell is my mother. I just cut off her $3,000 monthly allowance. She's upset because I showed my customers the receipts." The older officer frowned. He opened the binder. His eyes traced the highlighted lines, the bank logos, and the running total of $360,000. He stared at the paperwork for a long time. Then he looked up at me, taking in my pregnant belly, my calm face, and the quiet, supportive crowd standing behind me. He slowly closed the binder. He shook his head, a look of quiet disgust crossing his face. "I'm very sorry for the interruption, ma'am," he said softly. "Have a good afternoon. Congratulations on the baby." They turned around and walked out. The flashing lights disappeared down the street. That was the exact moment I knew I would never ever go back. The invisible chains were completely broken. In the 4 months that followed, the brutal consequences of their choices finally landed. Without my money to keep them afloat, the bank foreclosed on my parents' massive house. They were forced to sell everything at a terrible loss and move into a cramped, dark 2-bedroom apartment near a loud highway. Tyler's cousin vanished completely, taking every dime of their stolen money with him. Jessica, left with nothing but massive credit card debt and a nasty divorce, was forced to move back into that tiny apartment with them. My mother sent me exactly one email. It was 3 pages long, written in the middle of the night. It was a masterpiece of careful manipulation. She reframed the entire story to make me the cold, wealthy villain who had destroyed her family. There was not a single word of apology. I read it once, feeling absolutely nothing, forwarded it directly to a lawyer to document the harassment, and deleted the original. On a warm, rainy morning in late May, my daughter, Emma Grace Hayes, came into the world. The hospital room smelled like sterile alcohol and rain. When the nurse finally placed Emma onto my chest, the entire world stopped spinning. She was tiny, warm, and completely perfect. Margaret had been in the delivery room the whole time, holding my hand and crying tears of pure joy. William had paced holes into the waiting room floor. I looked down at Emma's sleeping face. Suddenly, a vivid flashback hit me. I was 12 years old again, sitting in my freezing dark bedroom next to the garage. The water heater was groaning loudly through the thin wall. I was holding a stale grocery store muffin, listening to my parents laughing with Jessica in the warm living room down the hall. I remembered the bone-crushing loneliness of being an unwanted ghost in my own home. I held Emma tighter, pressing my lips to her soft forehead. I made her a fierce, silent promise right there in the hospital bed. You will never hear that sound, I thought. You will never wonder if your mother loves you. Your worth will never be measured in bank transfers. You will be celebrated just for breathing. David sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes red from crying, and kissed my hand. Do you have any regrets? He whispered. I looked at him, then at our daughter. I regret the time I wasted, I said truthfully. 10 years of desperately hoping they would magically change. But the ending? No, I don't regret the ending at all. 2 years later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. The handwriting belonged to my father. I opened it at the kitchen table. It was a short letter. He admitted his deep cowardice. He admitted he had sat in his chair and watched it happen because it was easier than fighting my mother. He admitted he should have been there to walk me down the aisle. He didn't ask for a single dollar. He just said he was proud of the woman I had become. I cried quietly while reading it. The tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. I folded it up and put it in a drawer. I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe someday. Some doors stay permanently closed to protect you, and others stay cracked open just a fraction of an inch. And that is okay. If I am being completely honest, I don't think my mother is evil. She is just deeply broken. She grew up poor, completely terrified of sliding back into the dark. Jessica represented the wealthy, perfect image she desperately wanted to project. I represented the hard-working, practical reality she wanted to escape. Does that excuse what she did? Absolutely not. Understanding a toxic pattern isn't the same as forgiving it. So here is what I have learned from the ashes of my old life. Love with strict conditions isn't love, it is commerce. Setting a firm boundary isn't an act of cruelty, it is an act of survival. And the family you build with your own hands can be just as real and infinitely stronger than the blood family you were born into. If you are listening to this, and you are someone's ATM, if you are always giving pieces of yourself and never ever receiving, hear me right now. You are not broken, you are not selfish, you are not a bad daughter or son, you are just finally seeing clearly. Stepping out of the shadows of familial obligation takes a brutal kind of courage, but telling these raw, intense truths is how we break the cycle. If this story's journey toward freedom struck a chord deep within you, or if you're navigating your own path out of the dark, I invite you to subscribe and leave a like. Let's keep building a community rooted in real survival and shared healing. Drop a heart in the comments if you've had to build your own safe haven, and join me for more narratives that don't shy away from the hard realities of life. Remember, the dawn always comes after the darkness. Every single time.